Hello, local history, welcome. This is our lecture for the day. I apologize if my face is blocking some of the slideshow. It says authors of Berks County. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So if at any point today you're not really sure what my face is covering, I'm going to post this slideshow in the Google Classroom with this lecture so you can see the two side by side. Today, because there's not going to be a lot of open discussions and things like that, this is probably going to be a fairly quick lecture, maybe 15 minutes at the absolute most, because there's only really two names we need to talk about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. The first name is Wallace Stevens. So Wallace Stevens was born in Reading in 1879. You can see him here as a young man and as an older man. After working, going to college, coming back to Reading, working here for a few years, he then moves to Connecticut, where he's going to spend the rest of his life in Connecticut. But he's got an interesting life and an interesting career, so let's go ahead and talk about his life and how he kind of grew up. Well, first, he went to Harvard when he went to college. He graduated decently, but while he was there, he met a guy named Santayana. Now, Santayana was a Spanish philosopher who had a lot of beliefs about aesthetics and the role that like the visual plays both in writing and in art together. Sorry about that. My headphones just turned off randomly. In fact, I'm going to double check and make sure that my headphones are being recording. Yep, you are getting that. Okay, good. So he had a lot of unique views about how aesthetics played with both art and writing in that kind of combination. But the one thing about Santayana that is important to note is that Santayana was pro-eugenics movement and an extreme racist. Um, so take what Santayana says with a grain of salt. Despite that, though, Stevens kind of idolized Santayana. Stevens had a child named Holly who wrote a biography about Wallace Stevens later, where she recalls him literally like talking about Santayana nonstop for almost his entire life until Santayana passed away, and even then some, which just goes to show how much of an influence this man had on Wallace Stevens and his writing. Unfortunately, some of those negative beliefs are going to rub off on Wallace, and Wallace himself will also, as evident in some of his works, be kind of an extreme racist. Um, but that is what it is, right? I mean, we're going to talk about his life, but just be aware that Wallace Stevens did have some pretty racist opinions. So previous jobs. What did he do before he was an author? Well, after college, he got a job as a journalist. After that, he became a lawyer. I have those two in the wrong order. He became a lawyer for a few years, just like his father. He comes from a whole family of lawyers. His dad was a lawyer. He was a lawyer. He had four kids. Of those four kids, one of them becomes a lawyer. So law is kind of a thing in his family for a very long time. But then he becomes an insurance executive for a company in Connecticut, which is why he moves up to Connecticut, and makes a lot of money doing that. Wallace Stevens' personal politics, he was incredibly conservative. This is his home, by the way, in Connecticut. That's why this picture is here. This is his home in Connecticut. He had a lot. His personal politics, he was very conservative, very outspoken and like anti-government. Not necessarily in his writing, but when anyone who knew him personally, he was very vocal about his dislike of the government. So he married a guy, he married a girl named Elsie Mole. Now that ended up being a bit of a problem for him and his family. His parents were traditional, like high-class, wealthy people from Reading, and Elsie Mole was a court stenographer. Holly, of course, was his daughter. Was a court stenographer, and when he fell in love with her, they had a very long courtship of about 4 years before they ended up getting married. But his parents, as soon as he said he wanted to marry her, said, "No, she's beneath your station. She's lower class. She's poor. You can't marry her." But he married her anyway, and he actually, after he married her, his family did not attend his wedding, and they never spoke again. His parents kind of completely disowned Stevens for marrying Elsie Mole. He also, fun fact about he had a running with Hemingway. They had a house in Miami that they kind of got together at, and they disagreed a lot about something. The guy who recalled this in his biography couldn't remember what the disagreement was about. But Hemingway was 15 years younger than Stevens, but this disagreement resulted in a literal fistfight where Stevens broke his hand punching Hemingway in the jaw. And then Hemingway ended up like pushing him to the ground several times. So despite the fact that Hemingway got clocked hard by Stevens, Hemingway won that from being 15 years younger and able to take a punch apparently. But yeah, the two of them, the guy who wrote in the biography could not remember what they were arguing about, just that the argument devolved into a physical fist fight between Stevens and Hemingway in Miami, which I just think is a fun story. And that's Hemingway, by the way, if you didn't know. So what's the impact of his work? Wallace Stevens was a poet who wrote many, many, many different collections of poetry, whether it was um, losing my train of thought. He had many, many collections and individual poems that were widely praised, and he even won a Pulitzer Prize for one of his collections of poetry. So the next thing I have here is one of Wallace Stevens' poems, "The Emperor of Ice Cream." Read the whole left before the whole right. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm going to let you guys pause and read this at your leisure. There will also be, just as a kind of proof that you're paying attention for the day, and also there'll be a Google Doc with this slideshow in the classroom. In that Google Doc, I want you to tell me what you think this poem is about. Because there's a lot of controversy about the specifics of this poem, but everyone kind of believes it's about one particular thing, and I want to see if you can interpret it. Just that this is not a poetry class. This is just me being curious to see if you can do it. You can answer it in a sentence or two. It does not need to be a whole paragraph. I just want to see what you guys come up with. So sorry about that. My headphones and microphone turn themselves off every once in a while if they don't hear sound coming through, which since I'm talking and not listening to sound, that's what's happening and why I might pause every once in a while. But yeah, I just want to see if you can figure out the meaning or what you think the meaning is. There's no um, like you don't have to be correct. I'll probably, if I grade it, it's just going to be a very small amount of points just for completion to make sure you were listening to today and that you can just see what you come up with. See if your creativity gets it. So now we're going to talk about the second and argue an author, second author that you're much more familiar with, and that is John Updike. Now, here's a picture of John Updike, both as a young man and as an adult. John Updike was born in Shillington, and on Thursday, we're actually going to go visit his childhood home as it's just down the road. But a little bit about him. He went to Governor Mifflin High School. Big surprise, right? He graduated in, it was either 1950 or 1952. So neither of these pictures are necessarily went from when he went to school, the left being today and the right being 58. But it's close enough. So Updike's mother was actually a teacher at Governor Mifflin. She was an English teacher, and she attempted to become a published author. And Updike says that he remembers watching his mom sit at the typewriter and like try to write for days on end, and and that determination inspired him to want to be a writer himself. He graduated Governor Mifflin as valedictorian and ended up getting a full ride scholarship to Harvard, where he even graduated from Harvard summa cum laude, which is with highest honors, and that means he graduated in the top 5% of his class at Harvard. After he graduated from Harvard, he then went on to Oxford, where he studied how to be a cartoonist, ironically. He wasn't sure that he wanted to be a novelist just yet, but he wanted to be a cartoonist, and he studied that at Oxford. Um, so he is a very well-educated man who learned a lot about writing, reading, just the way that that you're supposed to authors. Oh my goodness, the way that you're supposed to write in general, and he got pretty good at it very clearly. While he was at Harvard, he ended up meeting his first wife, um, whose name was. Darn it, this is me forgetting. Hold on one second. Luckily, I have my phone, so I can just buy time by talking and Google John Updike wife. That's right, Mary Pennington. I knew it was Pennington. I couldn't remember Mary. So Mary Pennington is the one here on the left. That's his first wife. They meet when he's in Harvard, and they get married shortly thereafter. They have four kids together and are married for quite a long time. Before at least I believe at least 10 plus years, maybe 16 years, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Um, oh, there is a 53 to 74, so that's what 21 years. They were married for 21 years. They had four kids together before they ended up getting divorced in 1974. A few years later, John will meet and marry his second wife, Martha Bernhard. They don't have any kids together, but they stay married until Updike's death in 2009. By the way, I forgot to mention when it comes to death, in case you were curious, Wallace Stevens died of stomach cancer. Just in case you're curious about that. So back to John Updike. So John Updike, that's his family. He has 4 kids and 7 grandkids. Um, a lot of them are still. I think that most of them live in Massachusetts, as that's where John Updike moved with his first wife. After graduating and getting everything done, he ends up moving to Massachusetts, where he spends the rest of his life. So early writing and career before he wrote Rabbit Run, which is what he's very famous for. So he first got a job working for the New Yorker for the press. Um, and was a very accomplished journalist, and they had a lot of very nice things to say about John Updike going forward. The Carpentered Hen and Other Tame Creatures was a collection of poems and short stories by John Updike, and that was his first real big success. Was that novel, not novels, that collection of small stories, short stories and poems that you guys see there on the right. So when he moved to Massachusetts, he moved to New York to work at the New Yorker, and then moved to Massachusetts, where he then wrote Rabbit Run. Rabbit Rideau is the second book in the series. Rabbit Run is actually a 4 series book, but Rabbit Run is is a very very famous and widely critically acclaimed. That's what I'm trying to say. Critically acclaimed book, and it did not win awards at its time, but a lot of people, especially historians of writing and literature, acknowledge the impact that it had. And they acknowledge the impact that Rabbit Run had on the writing community and what John Updike was for authors. So what was Rabbit Run about? Rabbit Run is about Harry Rabbit Angstrom, who is long story short, I have a clip here, which is a scene from the movie that they made about Rabbit Run, which I'll post that link in the that you can click on that link because this slideshow will be posted on the Google Classroom if you want to watch it. I couldn't show the trailer because the trailer on YouTube, even though it's on YouTube, has some stuff that's not appropriate for school, which doesn't surprise us considering what the content of Rabbit Run is about. So Rabbit Run is about Harry, who is a high school basketball star, everyday average man working his job, who has a wife and a kid, and he ends up just getting bored with his life and has an affair with another woman, and that whole his life and the relationships that follow and fall out because of all that. And it's just a very realistic book as far as just what everyday life is like. The movie came out in the 70s. The book came out before that. I want to say the book came out in 1960, I think. I'll have to double check that date. Um, Actually, right here, notable works. Rabbit Run, yeah, 1960. Look at that, I called it. Um, so Rabbit Run came out in 1960. The movie came out a decade later. I've never seen the movie, so I'm not going to recommend it or not recommend it, but just know that the movie exists. But the interesting thing about the series is that Rabbit Run did not necessarily win the awards. However, Rabbit is Rich, the third book, won 3 different awards, all very, very large awards. It won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. It won the National Book Award, and it won the National Book Critics Circle Award. All 3 are very prestigious awards that the Rabbit Run won. The fourth book, Rabbit Rest, I think it was called, or Rabbit Will Rest, Rabbit Does Rest, something like that. I can't quite remember exactly. Rabbit at Rest. It's Rabbit at Rest. Also wins a Pulitzer Prize for fiction, making John Updike one of 4 authors to win 2 Pulitzer Prize for fiction ever. So John Updike is a very, very, very highly acclaimed author. So what was his legacy? So here's a quote by Adam Gopnik, who was a co-worker of his at the New Yorker, who said, "One of the greatest of all modern writers, the first American writer since Harry James to get himself fully expressed, the man who broke the curse of incompleteness that had haunted American writing." So a lot of people did hold Updike to a high standard, and his legacy stands. I'm sure you'll learn more about him when we go to his house on Thursday, and I'm sure they'll tell you all about his life and everything I missed. But just know that even though Berks County has only had 2 famous authors, that's still quite a lot of famous authors considering how big both of these names are. 2 Pulitzer Prize winning authors who both went to Harvard, who um, have multiple biographies written about each of them. So I don't know, not too bad for a shabby little town in the middle of Pennsylvania. But with that said, that is the end of my lecture and the slideshow. I hope you guys have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your asynchronous day. Get your work done. And I look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday.